So we're going to go ahead and approve the minutes. Representative Kraft, have you had a moment to look over the minutes? Can you move approval?
I have. I've moved their approval, Madam Chair.
Any comments or hearing none? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Great. And with that, we're having a discussion today on transmission, and it's a really important topic given some of the things that have been happening in Minnesota and other places too. So really excited that folks were able to join us for this, both in person and online. And maybe with that, we'll go to our first speaker, who is Jessica Burdett, Director for the Office of Energy, Reliability, and Security. So welcome, Ms. Burdett and Mr. Kelly. Thanks for joining us. Please state your name for the record and go ahead with your presentation.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Acomb and members. For the record, my name is Jessica Burdett, and I serve as the Director of the Office of Energy Reliability and Security for the Minnesota Department of Commerce. With me in the room today is our Director of Government Affairs, John Kelly. Thank you for the opportunity to update the Legislative Energy Commission on the status of our high voltage transmission system, which of course plays a critical role in providing reliable electricity to Minnesotans at the lowest possible cost. The role will only become more critical over the next years and decades. Over the past 15 years, the high voltage transmission system increasingly has been called on to help deliver wind and solar generated electricity from where it is produced to where it is needed. And last year, the Minnesota legislature amended Minnesota Statute 216B.1691 to require utilities in the state to generate or procure 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. Although Minnesota and the region has added new transmission over the last decade, more will be needed to meet this goal. I will be providing a brief overview of the Department of Commerce's role generally, and then more specifically on our role in the recent $464 million grant award from the U.S. Department of Energy for the Joint Transmission Interconnection Queue Project, otherwise known as the JTIQ project. Is that better? All right, great. So then other testifiers are here that will address some of the other things in more specificity. So to start, Commerce's role, back one slide. Commerce has a variety of roles as it relates to transmission infrastructure in Minnesota. First, we represent Minnesota's interests in regional and federal forums, and we represent Minnesota's residents, businesses, and governments when it relates to transmission infrastructure issues. We also represent the public interest before the Public Utilities Commission in matters related to certificate of need, as well as cost recovery issues for transmission infrastructure. And then finally, we also conduct environmental analysis, review, and provide technical expertise to the Public Utilities Commission for proposed energy project, including high voltage transmission lines. Additionally, this last year, Commerce established a new Office of Reliability and Security that is leading our efforts to not only represent our interests at the regional and federal level, but to also help plan, prepare, and respond to any energy situation with the emphasis on planning and preparation. So just a little bit more about the Office of Energy Reliability and Security. We operate pursuant to Minnesota Statute 216A.07, 216C.15, as well as various executive orders that address cyber security and disaster recovery and response. There are other federal mandates and responsibilities that are included that we can talk about if there are questions. We represent interests before bodies like MISO or Southwest Power Pool, as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, when there are plans being made for infrastructure build-out, as well as energy policy issues that could affect system reliability and security in Minnesota. Areas of our priorities include transmission planning, grid operations, petroleum, natural gas, and delivered fuel system constraints, community resilience for vulnerable populations, and cyber and physical security issues. We also have focus on the impacts of regional transmission planning and grid operations on the electric system reliability. And we're facilitating the JTIQ project, which I'll go into a little bit more later. And then finally, we develop and maintain the statewide energy security plan along with our emergency allocation and conservation procedures. We provide situational awareness to those who need it on emergent energy reliability and security issues. Next slide, please. Commerce recognizes the critical importance of transmission infrastructure investments to grid reliability, and we want to ensure that we're serving the public interest by more holistically focusing on these issues. The high-voltage transmission system in Minnesota and much of the United States is planned and operated by regional transmission organizations under federal oversight because high-voltage electricity crosses state boundaries and operates as one large interconnected system. In our case, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, is responsible for planning the high-voltage transmission system in 15 states and Manitoba, including most of Minnesota. And you'll hear from them in just a few moments, and they'll talk more about their work and their role here. So a couple of things to consider as we move through today's agenda. Lack of transmission capacity is a barrier to new wind and solar development, including our ability to achieve our energy policy goals in the state of Minnesota. The state's high-voltage electric transmission system is part of a much larger regional system that's planned by regional transmission organizations. In 2022, to reduce some of these constraints, MISO approved, with the urging of our administration, a long-range transmission plan for 17 large Midwest transmission projects, 3 of which are in Minnesota. Planning and constructing regional portfolios of cost-shared backbone transmission lines is more effective than a state-by-state approach because the multi-state transmission system works together as an integrated whole. And then finally, MISO and the neighboring Southwest Power Pool have also jointly planned 5 interregional transmission projects to help reduce interconnection barriers. In 2022, so more on that point, in 2022, through an innovative joint planning process, MISO and our regional transmission organization neighbor, SPP, embarked together to complete their joint targeted interconnection queue study. Parts of SPP are within Minnesota and led by Commissioner Tuma, and we have become increasingly involved in their processes over the last year as well. Next slide, please. So the 2022 JTIQ joint planning process resulted in 5 joint JTIQ projects, one of which is in Minnesota. There's a map, I actually think we're on the next slide, that shows the 5 projects located in 7 states along the border between MISO and SPP. These projects are intended to help reduce uncertainty and lower the cost of affected system transmission upgrades required when new generation projects interconnecting into the region affect the transmission system of each other. Back more. Back, yeah, yep. So one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is we have received a federal award from the U.S. Department of Energy recently. We were notified in October of this year for a $464 million award to help build these 5 transmission projects across SPP and MISO. This funding is coming through their Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program. And this is a partnership between the Minnesota Department of Commerce, MISO, SPP, the Great Plains Institute, and several transmission owners, including Xcel Energy and Otter Tail Power, who have a presence here in Minnesota. Sorry. Next slide. So one more slide. My slides got a little tangled up, forgive me. So with this funding to build these projects, there are several anticipated outcomes. First, we want to be able to demonstrate that there is a replicable and scalable solution to interregional interconnection and transmission planning studies. MISO and SPP are not the only ones that have seams issues, and there are other RTOs that are struggling with some of the same barriers and opportunities that we are as well. So we hope to create a replicable and scalable solution. We want to be able to leverage long-range studies of generation projects to deliver optimized transmission solutions. Building out transmission infrastructure is not inexpensive, and so we want to make sure that we do it as efficiently and as effectively as possible to mitigate any costs associated with these projects and the impacts on ratepayers. We want to make sure to allocate costs among projects over time with an innovative fixed per megawatt charge, which is different than how the process currently is and the costs are currently allocated. We also want to unlock approximately 30 gigawatts of new generation, which will mostly be wind and solar. And then finally, one of the big components of the federal award is to make sure that we have community benefits that go to those communities that are affected, and that we have targeted training and workforce development for disadvantaged communities. We know that we're going to have to build out more infrastructure that is going to be visible and that is going to come at a cost. And we want to make sure that people know why we need it, how it's going to work, and the impacts that are going to come from it. And so we want to focus on energy literacy and foundational knowledge to ensure that we're able to pursue these projects and deliver reliable and affordable electricity to the state of Minnesota. So with that, I don't have any other talking points, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have before I turn it over to our colleagues at MISO.
Why don't we take a minute and see if members have any questions? And maybe I'll just start and thank you for your presentation. And you started out saying that the lack of transmission is a barrier to achieving our clean energy goals. And so a question for you is, do we know how much we would need in order to achieve those goals?
So I think that that's something that as we study the needs for resources and resource adequacy to meet our reliability and affordability goals, that's going to be unique to each utility and what they need to meet their objectives. It's not just building infrastructure that we're going to need. We're also going to need some short and near-term fixes to our transmission system to alleviate constraints and congestion within parts of our system. And so I couldn't say we're going to need 6 transmission lines of a certain size at a certain time and place, but it is a need at a very significant level, not only to build it, but to also make tweaks to our current system.
Great, thank you for that. Representative Kraft?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Acom. So I want to follow up on that. When you say, thank you for the informative presentation. When you say short and medium-term fixes, can you talk a little bit more about what some of those might be?
Chair Acom, Representative Kraft, thank you for the question. I could speak a little bit to it, but we do have another presenter here today, Matt Ellis with Grid Partners North, who's going to speak more specifically to what they're doing for short and midterm fixes. And so I think that that would be a better opportunity to learn.
Great, thank you. Anything else? No. Anybody else have questions for Director Burdette? Seeing none here. Anybody online? I don't think so. Okay. Thank you, and I presume you'll be here in case any questions do come up. Senator Pratt, did you? No? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. One quick question. So you mentioned that transmission is a barrier. The lack of transmission is a barrier moving forward with renewable energy goals. Oh, thank you. I should know that, shouldn't I? This is the Senate room.
This is a warm-up session. We're getting ready for session.
And that MISO helped clear the way for some additional transmission, but can you maybe highlight some of the barriers we've had to building transmission? And why, and maybe a little bit more on how MISO helped us clear those hurdles?
Director
Yeah.
Burdette.
So we have made a lot of investments in transmission over the last decade. We made some pretty significant investments, but as our energy system has changed, as we evolve our resource mix, as the threats or vulnerabilities to the system evolve, it necessitates change in our transmission infrastructure. In terms of some of the barriers, I don't know that I would characterize them as necessarily barriers to building transmission, but because these are large projects that we're talking about, we make very deliberate choices in how we pursue these projects. There are processes to look at the costs and make sure there is a need for these projects. We have processes in place to ensure that we're allocating them fairly and that utilities are charging just and reasonable rates. We also want to ensure that if communities are impacted, that we have ample public participation processes to hear what those impacts are and the opportunity to make any changes we might need to make to those projects. So we're deliberate and with that sometimes slow, but in a way to protect consumers. We've been focused on different parts of the system, building different parts of the system, and now as we recognize how the system is evolving, we're evolving the need to build a transmission.
Senator Pratt, any follow-up?
Not really a question, but maybe more of a comment. We've been talking about transmission for over 10 years. As we continue to look forward at increased demand for electricity, we know that we're going to need transmission in order to avoid brownouts and make sure that our energy system is stable and reliable. I'm not sure that I get that same sense of urgency from the department. When we start talking about long-term investments and it doesn't really feel like we talked about, what were the hurdles? Was it land acquisition? Was it, this, was it that? Didn't really talk about how MISO helped clear the way so we could get some of these projects done. I think I'd like to be, and we could take this for a different time, but I think there has to be a discussion around the fact that demand is increasing, and unless we want to be California and lose our power at the absolute worst times, when it's 20 below or when it's 100 above, and it puts people's lives at risk, then I think, if we talk about, and security is important, and we've talked about
Recording
security.
stopped.
I just want to make sure that the department and the PUC and everybody has the same sense of urgency that demand is going up and it's stressing our system. And we have to view that as a real threat as we take power offline, as we, all of these options. I'm just concerned that I'm not hearing that same sense of urgency.
And I will just say before I turn it over to Director Burdette, I think that's why we're here today. We're going to hear about the task force through the PUC with some recommendations. And so I think there is an urgency, and I certainly recognize the urgency of getting transmission done more quickly and that we maintain affordable and reliable energy. Director Burdette, did you want to respond?
Yeah, Chair Acom, Senator Pratt, thank you for the feedback around not getting this sense of urgency. I live and breathe this on a daily basis and do have a sense of urgency, but I will be sure to bring that feedback back to my counterparts and colleagues at the department. And then to your point about not really addressing what MISO did to clear the way, MISO is up next, and I know that they'll be able to speak to that more eloquently than me. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Burdette. And next, speaking of MISO, we have Director Tricia DeBleeker with MISO, State Policy and Strategy Director. And then joining us remotely is Laura Rausch, the Executive Director on Transmission Planning. And so, Ms. DeBleeker, I will turn it over to you, and you guys can figure out the order you're going.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the Legislative Energy Commission. Thank you for having MISO here today. This is an exciting time in energy. There's lots of changes, and so we're happy to provide you updates whenever we can on the amount of transformation going on. Today, we're here to talk transmission. So we have online Laura Rauch is our Executive Director of Transmission Planning at MISO. She's going to speak to the long-range transmission planning, the joint targeted interconnection queue projects that are underway. First, I'm going to talk really briefly about MISO itself. And so MISO, as mentioned, is a nonprofit, independent, member-based organization. We cover the area from Manitoba down to Texas. We have, in my mind, I always look at it as we have three core functions. We ensure we run markets, we ensure reliable operations, and we conduct planning processes for regional transmission. And so in that markets category, MISO manages the buying and selling of wholesale electricity in one of the world's largest energy markets. Second, in that reliable operations function, we are a regional transmission operator designated by FERC. And so we essentially dispatch energy on the grid, ensuring that there are reliable resources that we can turn on when needed. Last is that planning function. We'll talk in depth about that, but some caveats to all of this is that MISO does not own any transmission or generation on the system. We cannot have any affiliation with any members, and so we are an independent organization. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move it over to Laura. And so Laura, I believe you are online and ready to go.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Tricia. Good afternoon, and thank you to the members of the Legislative Energy Commission for the chance to come and speak to you. As Tricia mentioned, my name is Laura Rauch. I'm the Executive Director responsible for MISO's transmission planning process. So today we did want to come to you and talk a little bit about the efforts that we're taking to make sure that our transmission system is able to meet the goals of our states and our membership. But before I dive into that or into this slide, I want to provide a little bit of background on our transmission planning process to help set the stage in general. One of the key roles and what we really focus on in transmission planning at MISO is making sure that we support the reliability of our system, especially in light of the increased load and a resource fleet that's rapidly changing here. Carbon-free and clean energy goals set by MISO member utilities, states and municipal government policies, and customer preference are continuing to drive growth in wind, solar, battery, and hybrid projects. This fleet transition is significant, and so as we have started today discussing, it will continue to require changes at a rapid rate to meet member goals. We see, and we have found, transmission is a low-cost enabler of these policies at the end of the day. And so MISO's evaluations, our processes, our studies, and transmission planning aim to meet these member goals at the least cost. And this least cost requires balancing both generally larger, more localized generation resources, with those that are typically smaller and more dispersed across the region that Tricia just described. This allows us to take advantage of areas with high wind and solar potential, but also to manage and make sure that we're not escalating transmission costs and land usage. At the end of the day, we seek to design transmission that provides both everyday cost efficiency in delivering energy. But as we're seeing more and more, transmission is also a critical tool during those extreme weather events to make sure that power can get to the areas impacted by them. Now, specifically on this slide, the long-range transmission planning process, which is an intense and focused planning effort to identify transmission solutions required to maintain reliability in the face of the changing electric grid, helps us define the transmission required to meet our member goals in this least cost and robust manner. So you'll hear us talk about how this work is being broken up into 4 tranches, which represent different groups of transmission to meet the same goal. Our initial focus and our current focus has been on the Midwest with tranches 1 and tranche 2. This focus represents the urgency of the needs in the Midwest subregion of MISO, and this urgency is driven by generation retirement, load growth, and the resource portfolio changes. So we'll spend a little bit more time on that throughout the remainder of their discussion today. Tranche 3 will shift our focus to the South region of MISO, and Tranche 4 looks at the connection between the Midwest and the South. Next slide, please. The first group of projects, Tranche 1, received its MISO approvals in 2022 and is well underway in state processes. This was intended and found to be a set of what we call least regrets transmission projects. And by least regrets, we mean that under the different situations that we looked at, knowing that we can't predict the future and what it looks like in 20 to 40 years, these projects continuously held value and multiple types of value. And that, we can say that with confidence because our planning process is thorough. This portfolio itself was developed with extensive stakeholder inputs, including over 200 internal and external meetings. And for those external meetings and workshops, we saw 200 to 300 participation. So it only through the work of our members, our stakeholders, the utilities in the room with you, where we really were able to define this. The end result of this study process and collaboration was a $10.3 billion transmission portfolio, which provides economic benefits between 2.6 and 4.0 times the cost of the transmission investment itself, while helping to reliably enable our member goals. A key point to understand here from Minnesota's perspective is that once these lines were approved in MISO's processes, they became part of what's included in our studies as the future state of the transmission system. What this means is that when MISO's board approved them, which is the final step of our process and was received in 2022, generation developers seeking to interconnect to our system see reduced interconnection costs almost immediately. So you can think of this as a process that runs in parallel with our steps to interconnect new generation, either parallel or slightly staggered, without having full dependency. They really seek to look at the grid and solve different problems. Next slide, please. MISO Board of Director approval, that last step in our process, also gives transmission owners in states like Minnesota the opportunity and obligation to build the transmission projects. And so after approval, the Tranche 1 projects started and are currently moving through the state regulatory process. I would just note here and give some appreciation to Minnesota Public Utility Commission and the Minnesota utilities, as you all are really leading the pack on the progress towards getting these Tranche 1 lines approval. I know that takes a lot of work to get to. So we very much appreciate the diligence that's been put forth to continue to move these lines forward. Next slide, please. Following Tranche 1, we're now working through the study process for the next step in defining what transmission system is required in what we call Tranche 2, with the timeline shown here. The Tranche 1 portfolio provides that least regrets starting point on the transmission system to reliably and efficiently meet our member goals. Tranche 2 builds upon that to go further and make sure that we're meeting further suite of our member needs. The Tranche 2 will build upon Tranche 1 to provide additional reliability, resilience, and economic benefits. Considering the more recent impacts not able to be considered in Tranche 1, these include things like the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, escalating load growth that continues to climb in the last few years, and also advancing member renewable and decarbonization goals. This study process is ongoing. We anticipate having a starting set of solutions yet this spring, with the potential that these are even larger than the $10 billion in Tranche 1, and that we will be having these projects approved later in 2024. Last slide, please, Tricia. Last, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight the SPP MISO Joint Targeted Interconnection Portfolio. Probably not surprising anyone in the room, our neighbor to the west, SPP, is experiencing similar resource mix shifts to MISO, and we both are seeing significant requests in our generation interconnection queue for new generators. This led to the transmission system to be what we call at capacity amongst the border of SPP and MISO. Essentially, we were unable to support new generation requests without significant transmission investment. The investment was leading to costly upgrades for small groups of interconnection customers in certain locations. And unfortunately, these higher costs drove those interconnection customers to no longer be economically viable, withdraw from our study projects, and then we had to start the study process over to understand what happens without those projects in line. JTIQ was a new study process to take a step back and look at that and make sure that we have the right solutions that can accommodate these generations moving forward. It ultimately resulted in a project portfolio with a collaborative effort through MISO, SPP, and our stakeholders, identifying and moving forward transmission solutions for these interconnections on the seams, helping to increase the certainty for those customers, and minimizing the risk that they must bear at the end of the day. That concludes this efforts in the last stage of the process. We anticipate having those approved yet this year as well. And as discussed by the Department of Commerce, we did receive appreciation from the DOE in recognition of the study process and were selected for an award through the GRIP program. That concludes my comments. I would be happy to hear any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Was there more presentation? I see a couple more slides here.
No, that was the end of the transmission presentation, and we're available for questions.
Okay, great. We'll take a couple of minutes and start with Representative Igo.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my questions, I want to start by going over the projects 2 and project 3. I just kind of want to know what is located at each of the 4 or it's 5 locations for production, energy production in there that's going to be being moved. I just wondering if we can get that answered.
Mr. Bleeker?
Thank you. So I think the question was, what's the energy production? Or
Yeah,
what's the-
so, Madam Chair, what's being produced at Big Stone South, Alexandria, Cassie's Crossing, Benton, and then the Iron Range location?
Ms.
Right.
Bleeker?
Thank you, Chair. Just want to clarify the question. Are you looking for the generation sources that are spurring the need for these transmission lines? Laura, do you want to speak to that, or is that something we should follow up with?
So we will certainly follow up to talk a bit more about the overall investment. One thing I would make sure to emphasize, though, is these are not projects that are directly tied to integrating specific generation interconnection requests. Instead, these are projects that are more akin to an interstate highway rather than a road to a new Walmart that's put in place. These are projects that will help enable all of the projects in the region. So we can certainly talk about the amount of generation that we expected in the region as a whole. And certainly generators near those substations would have benefits. But similar to a new interstate going through a neighborhood, the neighborhood is benefiting, but is not the sole driving force of that new highway.
Representative Igo?
Madam Chair, thank you. So I guess what I was trying to get clarified there is because the Iron Range location is Cohasset, which is the Boswell Energy Center, which is on schedule to be closed down and not produce coal-fired power anymore. Benton is the Sherco, which is on schedule to be closed down for coal production. Cassie's Crossing, Alexandria are going to be solar, and Big Stone will be coal. So what I'm drawing together here by these 2 lines that we're spending $1.5 billion on is so we can get coal energy from South Dakota and have solar here. I'm just seeing a huge waste of money when we could do things a lot better. I needed to point that out for the committee. Thank you.
Did you want to comment on that?
Really quick to follow up on that, thanks, Chair. One thing might be helpful, and I find these maps a little misleading at times, and because they're highlighting just that LRTP Tranche 1 project set, where when you look at this as the integrated transmission system as a whole, you see essentially how the network model really is moving power in different directions and for different reasons. So I would say, Laura, you can speak to this too, but the baseline and the amount of information beneath that on all of the different generator sources, it really is so diverse and so networked that it largely isn't related directly to power flows from specific generators. So we can follow up with maybe a better baseline map of that would help show the network model.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Senator Pratt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the question I asked Department of Commerce. Can you help me understand what hurdles MISO was able to help us clear in order to get these projects done, and what are the hurdles that we're facing in moving some of these transmission projects forward?
Director DeBeeker, or?
I believe Laura will take that one.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So the first hurdle, especially for this tranche one, apologize, I'll speak into the mic a little bit clearer, was accomplished through the hard work of MISO staff and stakeholders, which is understanding the complexity of the future system and making sure that we define transmission that provides value under many different conditions, delivering many different fuel types, and both from a reliability, day-to-day economic benefits, and also in those extreme conditions. I will say there is a lot of work, and certainly I understand Great River Energy is in the room and can talk about what it takes to get a transmission line from this identified value into steel in the ground. And that is absolutely a critical part to make sure that the best land usage is selected, that the transmission is built. There's a lot of nuance that goes into that, and MISO stands ready to help support that with testimony of the value. But the key thing that MISO really views our role in is making sure that we understand the future possibilities and defining transmission which goes and serves and has value, not under a single scenario, not even under what our members are telling you, but broadening that to define the number of types of values there are, so that we can clearly say that this is needed, and also clearly remove any lines that would not provide that direct value.
Senator Pratt, do you have a brief follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So in the Department of Commerce's presentation, they said in 2022, to reduce transmission constraints, MISO approved a long-range transmission plan for 17 large Midwest transmission projects, 3 of which are in Minnesota. I'm still not clear, right? What was the barrier we were facing, and how did MISO help us clear that? We're talking about long-term planning, and here's how we define these things, but we're really not talking about how we're moving these projects forward, if specifically we're talking about the 3 within Minnesota. How did MISO help us clear those hurdles so that we could get those projects working?
Laura-
Executive Director?
Laura, I
I
can
don't know, whoever.
take a stab at that one. Thank you, Chair. What I think, being around this for 2 decades now, there was essentially this got over the line this time. We got these suite of projects going. I think that there were, and maybe GRE can speak to this more on the CapEx initiative, and essentially that was kind of that last round of transmission that was able to make it through. We're doing that yet again, and I think you're asking why, and what's different this time? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, it seems like we're Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Senator.
It seems like we're touting that MISO kind of helped move these projects along. What I'm hearing is kind of standard process. Was there something special that happened that moved these projects along? Did we need MISO to step in from a sense of urgency standpoint to move them along?
And does it have anything to do with the state's commitments to renewable generation and so forth?
Thank you.
Director DeBleeker.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think from what I've seen, it's really there were a lot more markers in the sand, and there's a lot more, the North Star of what are we planning to, what do we regionally need, and there was a groundswell of support from many different members and sides that really helped MISO move forward on LRTP. I think that there's been different initiatives over the years that just didn't have that same level of member support. So I would say that there are, whether it's clean energy goals, whether it's member goals, state goals, all of those things aligned to allow this to move forward. And so MISO essentially had to bring stakeholders together. Laura went through the long list of all of the meetings that took place to sort of build that consensus on the LRTP projects. And it's just, I think that's the role that MISO is should be playing and is playing in this transmission development. Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but hopefully we're getting at the answer here.
I agree. So what we have found is that to get transmission constructed and to define what transmission needs to be constructed for these larger regional projects, there's really three things that need to happen. One is a robust policy consensus, which the states provided that, the members provided that. MISO gathered that information, but that wasn't something that we pushed ourselves other than recognizing the consensus. The second is a robust business case. So we're talking about a $10 billion of investment here. That is a lot of costs that we would ask for to be borne by people throughout the state of Minnesota and throughout the MISO Midwest footprint. So we need to make sure that we are defining what this is critical and defining transmission that has that value. Congestion can be very expensive. And so we found transmission that is actually going to pay for itself through reducing the cost of electricity delivered at the end of the day. And we also help with having cost allocation that really ties into those benefits so that we are asking the people who are getting benefits to pay for it. So LRTP is not a typical MISO process. It is one we have created based on the policy consensus that we have seen to make sure we can recognize the value of transmission and move that forward as urgently as possible, and also to make sure that there's a way to recognize the benefits and pay for it.
Thank you. We're going to do one final question with Senator Friends before we switch over to our next speaker. Senator Friends, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to MISO for the presentation. First of all, Senator Pratt, basically what we're doing here is congestion is costing us a lot of money, and these projects are going to help relieve that congestion and save a lot of money. Also want to throw out a quick thanks to the Department of Commerce for the lowest possible cost comment. I think that's exactly what people expect us to do. And then I want to finally give our friends at MISO an A-, maybe an A, for the analogy of interstate highway compared to road to Walmart. That's exactly what we need, is that kind of simplification for people like us who are newer to the energy world. Bottom line, thank you very much for the presentation. Looking forward to the congestion relief that these projects are going to provide and our ability to bring our renewable energy on the grid cheaper and more reliably. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Friends. And thank you, Director DeBleeker. With that, we're going to transition to our next speaker, Matt Ellis with Grid North Partners. Welcome to the committee. Please go ahead and state your name for the record, and you can begin with your presentation. There we go.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Acomb, members of the Legislative Energy Commission. My name is Matt Ellis. I'm from Great River Energy. Today, I'm here on behalf of Grid North Partners. I'm the co-executive director. Very much appreciate the opportunity to provide perspectives of Minnesota transmission owners on the state of our grid, on transmission needs and what actions Grid North Partners is taking to achieve the state's and our collective goals in a very timely manner. Let's see if I can. Transmission is a team sport, and I know that sounds cliched, but it truly is. And I think you've heard that from the previous speakers, and it truly does. It takes everyone. It takes the utilities, it takes the agencies, it takes MISO, regulators, policymakers, and I'll add in local communities, people, all working together to not only achieve the state's goals in a reliable manner, but to do so in a manner which has the least impacts to communities. This importance of teamwork is something that Grid North Partners very much understands. It's the lifeblood of our organization. Grid North Partners, which is an evolution of CapEx 2020, that was our former name, is a voluntary partnership of 10 Minnesota and surrounding area utilities, names of which are on the bottom part of this slide. This partnership is one of a kind. There's not another group like this across the entire nation. We're a diverse group. We include cooperatives, municipals, investor-owned utilities from very large to very small. And we take pride in the fact that despite having different business objectives, we have a proven track record of being able to come together to advance plans for the greater good of the state. This afternoon, we've heard a lot about current and future plans. And I'm a history guy, and I think for context, it actually makes sense to provide a bit of history on the history of the Minnesota transmission grid. While as transmission owners, we are constantly upgrading, maintaining the transmission grid. The last major build out in this state occurred back in the 2010s. And that was largely driven to enable the state's renewable portfolio standards. And so going further back, really the genesis of that build out was in the early 2000s. The Minnesota utilities started seeing an upcoming inflection point. Significantly changing needs and expanding grid expansion was needed. At that point in time, demand for electricity, it was increasing, and we saw a need to interconnect significant amount of new renewable resources. So there's obviously a lot of parallels then to today. The Minnesota utilities had the foresight that expanding the grid could be done more effectively by collaboratively planning rather than each of us doing so individually, as was more or less the standard at that time. Furthermore, given the magnitude of this change, we recognized that incremental changes weren't needed. We needed a large step change. And so we set forth a long-term vision. So in 2004, CapEx 2020, that was the previous name of Grid North Partners, was formed with the goal to expand the grid to meet the needs through the year 2020. That approach resulted in the successful development of over 800 miles of transmission across the state, and that's shown on this slide in orange. Now, at the time, that collaborative approach, that long-term vision, that was thought as very revolutionary. There was universities that wrote papers on it. The U of M wrote a great paper on it. But now, that's the national standard. And so that was all pioneered right here in Minnesota. Now MISO has taken the framework of that approach and they've amplified it. They've brought it to new levels of sophistication. They're looking even longer term. They're collaborating across a 15-state region. So Senator Pratt, to one of your earlier questions, I think one of the biggest things MISO's enabled with this is they have optimized this plan, not just across the state, but across a 15-state region to help accomplish these goals in a more efficient and reliable manner. I also think it's important, just for context, just to state today, the Minnesota transmission grid, it remains safe, it remains reliable, it's provided access to more renewable energy faster than was anticipated, but it's being pushed to its limits. And that's evident in the increasing congestion levels that we're experiencing across the state. And as mentioned earlier today, transmission grid expansion is one of, if not the critical paths to achieving the state's decarbonization goals. So building upon previous success of collaboration, but again, seeing that a broader collaboration was needed this go around than the last go around, Grid North Partners and many others advocated to MISO to perform what ultimately became of as the long-range transmission plan that you heard of earlier. And the Grid North Partners member utilities, we supported that plan. We participated in that MISO stakeholder process throughout. And Tranche 1 truly is a monumental step forward to achieving the state's decarbonization goals. We applaud MISO's leadership. As MISO showed earlier, the portfolio includes 18 projects across all of the Midwest. 3 of those are in Minnesota, and those are the 3 that you can see here on the slide. And as MISO showed, if you compare the status of the projects, of the 3 Minnesota projects to the rest of the portfolio, the Minnesota projects are the furthest along. We are working expeditiously to develop those projects. The Minnesota projects are the only projects to achieve the milestone to file for the regulatory application. So have done all the engagement and route development, and they're moving through the regulatory process as well. For 2 of the projects, the first round of public regulatory meetings have already occurred. And what I'll say is this progress, this status, it's not happen chance. One of the primary lessons that we learned during 2010 through that build out is that the most important stakeholder in all of this is local communities. It's people, early and often engagement, and the utilities have hit the ground running to hold those public meetings, to have one-on-one conversations with anyone who will listen. And this is not a check the box exercise to meet a regulatory requirement, but a true desire to get out there and engage landowners, communities who are impacted by this necessary infrastructure, but trying to find creative solutions to minimize those impacts. I have a colleague who always says every day spent engaging early saves more than a day when we get into the formal regulatory process, and I think that is absolutely true. So while we are working as expeditiously as possible to develop these transmission lines, it takes time to develop a high voltage transmission line. This is major infrastructure. Tranche 1 lines are expected to be in service around the year 2030, give or take a few depending on the specific project. And while these Tranche 1 projects are the true solution to the increasing congestion that we're experiencing across the state, we know that it's going to take some time before we start seeing those benefits. And so it's this development timeline and a question of, well, what can we do sooner, more expeditiously, that led Grid North Partners to take further action. And at the end of last year, we made an announcement that we plan to develop 19 additional transmission solutions to reduce congestion, and we plan to have those all in service within the next 2 years. And so our goal with these is to squeeze as much capacity as we can out of the existing grid to help us bridge to these longer-term solutions. These 19 solutions, which Grid North Partners will be individually constructing, total price tag is around $130 million. We expect the economic savings, the congestion relief savings, to be at least 2 times that amount. So these should more than pay for themselves in the near term. These are not new transmission lines, how you would think of as a new transmission line. It's no new right-of-way is required. In fact, from the naked eye, most of the time you couldn't tell that anything has been done to these. These are upgrades of the existing equipment. If you would take any of these 19 and you'd pick them out and you'd look at them in isolation, they're frankly quite unremarkable. But it's really when you put all 19 of these together, all of these little fixes across, it really amplifies the benefits and again, shows the value of collaboration in this team nature. So let me just wrap up with one last slide. So as we go forward right now today, we continue to develop both the near-term solutions and the long-range solutions, and we're doing that in parallel. At the same time, we also support and we are actively working with MISO and other utilities to identify the next plan, Tranche 2 plan. And so I'll just wrap up by saying, we still have a lot of work to do to get us to 2040. And it's going to take each of us working together, but we truly have a great start and we have good momentum going behind that. So thank you again for this opportunity, Madam Chair. That concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I appreciate that. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ellis, really interested to hear about this. Appreciate the focus on those 19 projects. Can you give a sense of what the overall cost of transmission congestion is in Minnesota and what portion of the problem the 19 solutions solving?
Yeah, and
Mr.
unfortunately, Madam Chair, Representative Kraft, unfortunately, I can't give an absolute number. It changes. So that's one of the things that's difficult with congestion. It is constantly changing. I don't have the dollar amount. I can follow up with what it has cost the last couple of years. These 19 solutions are intended to address the largest areas of congestion that we have in the state, though.
Representative Kraft, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I understand the fluctuation. If you can now, is this a 10-ish%, a 50-ish%, a 90-ish%? Can you venture that? And if not, I still would appreciate follow-up on that.
Mr. Ellis.
Madam Chair, Representative Kraft, I'll have to follow up with you on that. I just don't want to speculate and give you a number.
Thanks.
Not seeing any other questions right now. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate your time and coming. And if you stick around, maybe there might be more questions at the end. We are going to then transition to our final presenter, Mr. Dan Lipschultz, who was a facilitator for the Public Utility Commission Task Force on transmission and permitting reform. So I believe he's joining us online.
I am.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. I'll kind of give a little bit of background and won't go on too long, leaving some time and opportunity for questions. But I think it was about a year ago that Minnesota enacted the most aggressive electric sector decarbonization mandate in the country. That means under that law, as you all know, the electric sector in Minnesota will have to be 100% carbon-free in about 16 years. That's a little over one utility planning cycle. And among other things, what we know is that to meet that mandate will require the construction of a massive amount of new renewable generation and transmission to connect it all together and connect it to the load centers where the power is actually used. And against that backdrop, I think it requires all of us to do what we can to ensure that the regulatory processes for approving the new generation and transmission that we're going to need are as efficient, timely, and cost-effective as possible. And it was really against that backdrop that last August, the Commission had a planning meeting and took testimony and discussed the state of Minnesota's approval processes for new transmission and generation. And at the end of that meeting, the Commission instructed the Executive Secretary to initiate a stakeholder process to bring some focus to the discussion. Everyone at the time knew that we're really going to need to address these permitting processes for new projects. But the discussion was fairly diffuse and hadn't really come together in a way that provided some order and clarity to it. And so with that in mind, the Commission asked the Executive Secretary to initiate the stakeholder process and have it completed in time for the legislative session, because understood at the time was the fact that almost everything that can or should be done would have to be done by the legislature. With that in mind, the Commission asked me to facilitate those stakeholder meetings. And they also asked me to work with their staff to put together a broad representative group of stakeholders in the ecosystem of permitting and transmission and generation. So I worked with staff and we've actually reached out to over 30 different organizations and individuals, agencies, sort of organizations, labor, property rights organizations, counties, cities, across the gambit. And we ended up with a stakeholder group of 31 people representing various organizations, again, running the gambit from property rights groups to state agencies and everything and anything in between. So we only had time for 3 meetings, each one 3 hours. And we started with a blank sheet of paper. And the idea was to develop ideas, suggestions on improvements that can be made to these processes, and then vet and discuss the merits of those ideas as much as possible within that time frame. We came up with, and you'll see it in the report, what we're calling an idea matrix. And from a blank sheet of paper in 3 meetings, 3 hours each, we came up with, as a group, over 30 ideas, 30 suggestions for improvements to these permitting and environmental review processes that essentially every project, transmission and generation, has to go through. So it turned out to be, I think, a surprisingly productive and very helpful, productive process. And you have that, the results of that in front of you to review, and I'd be happy to discuss in more detail that with you today. This general sentiment of the stakeholder group, I think I can describe as follows. I think they all agree that the current process in Minnesota, or these processes, are not broken, but that they can and should be improved to make them more efficient, timely, and cost-effective, given the challenges that we have and the need to make sure that there's confidence in the public confidence in these processes. We're asking a lot of Minnesotans. We're asking them to bear up under a lot of additional construction. We're asking them to potentially pay higher rates. We're asking them to sort of abide a lot of confusion along the way. And I think it behooves all of us, and this is really what the commission had in mind and what the stakeholder group thought as we developed and discussed all of this. We can make this process better. We can make it more timely and cost-effective and more efficient. Not with one or two things, but with a lot of things. No one idea in that matrix you have is going to significantly change the processes, make them significantly more efficient or timely or cost-effective. But when you combine a number of them together, you can make a serious and have a seriously positive, significantly positive impact on these processes and really help achieve what needs to be achieved in a relatively short period of time. With that, I can take questions. If anyone would like me to walk through some of the ideas in the matrix, I'd be happy to do that. One final thought on that idea matrix in the report. I organized it in a way to put the ideas up front that were discussed the most and that would also likely have the largest impact with the least controversy and that would also, and this is an imperative, I think, for the stakeholder group, that would not undermine or reduce public input or impede the commission's ability to have a robust record for decision. And the first 12, in a sense, are probably the ones that we discussed the most, that the group as a whole thought would move the ball forward significantly, make a difference, but not reduce public involvement or impede the commission's ability to have the record it needs for decision. So I'll leave it there. You have the report in the matrix. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'll walk through anything you'd like me to walk you through.
Thank you, Mr. Lipschultz. And before I turn it over to questions from colleagues, I have just a quick question. Thank you for all of this work by you and all of the members on the stakeholder group. My question is about how the ideas within the idea matrix, how did they get added on? Like, was there some sort of what was the process to get an idea included within the matrix?
That's a great question, Madam Chair. What we did is essentially, after starting out with a presentation by Louise Miltich and Christy Brusman on the process, all these processes, so everybody would have a common understanding of how this works, we really just threw it open for ideas. And various stakeholders came up with ideas, and then we'd have discussions, and we discussed those ideas. And as we did that, in real time, we would write up a summary of the idea and as best we could, the discussions and the thinking that went in to those ideas. So we really kind of just built this matrix organically in real time as we went along. After each meeting, I would go through with staff and try to refine and based on our best recollection and the recordings that we had, add what we might have missed in real time. But it really developed that way, just to sort of through 3 hours of discussions and the good, we assembled the right people because everybody was heavily engaged in offering up ideas, discussing those ideas, challenging ideas. And at the end of the day, if you look through this list, especially the first 12, 13, 14, there was very little disagreement or pushback on those ideas. I'm not going to say there was consensus because it wasn't we weren't seeking consensus and we didn't have a voting process. But I think I feel very comfortable characterizing the stakeholder views generally as very supportive of certainly the first 12, 13, 14 ideas and many of the others as well.
Well, thank you for that. And maybe as people are looking through and taking a look at the matrix, maybe would you mind, Mr. Lipschultz, walking through on a high level the first 12 or so that you were referring? Maybe that can help us fully understand the recommendations here.
Madam Chair, happy to do that. And that's what I did at the last meeting when we presented it to the commission. So I'll start with the first idea. And when you look at this matrix, the first 4 ideas are things that the commission can actually do on its own under its existing authority. The first one, and it's an interesting one, and it seems so simple, is to replace the commission's order at the beginning of the process. The commission is required by statute to determine whether the application for the project is complete. And the commission generally, as it always does, case, it takes comment, and then it has a public meeting to deliberate, applications, and then at the end of the day, that process takes 30 to 60 days when the statute actually requires a completeness decision by the commission within 10 days of the application. So for some time now, the commission's completeness decision has been out of sync with the statutory timeframe, necessarily so. It's not because the commission's dragging its feet. It just takes time to go through that process, and it takes generally 20 days, 30 days sometimes to issue the order after the commission's decision. So we all came around, there was, I think, really general consensus here that needs to change and can change. And the commission can change it within its existing authority. So that idea is instead of issuing an order, the commission will establish a completeness checkoff process that can be handled by the executive secretary. You don't have to have a formal commission. And that, as we look into it, can save, 30 to 60 days off of the process, just doing that. Secondly, just requiring early coordination meetings with relevant agencies. There are some cases with some developers, most developers don't do this, but there are some developers that don't touch base with the DNR and MnDOT and other agencies that are really important and key to getting projects approved early on. That early meeting to identify issues, or whether there even are any issues with those agencies, can be really critical to moving the process forward and getting the application filed with the commission sooner. You want to get that application filed as soon as you can, and then you want that application to process as soon as it can, as quickly as it can be, consistent with the public interest and the need to actually delve into a lot of important issues. So requiring early coordination. Third, establishing comment periods with deadlines for these other agencies that are involved in the PUC process. It seems simple, but it's not that these other agencies are dragging their feet. The process can get a little confusing, and a lot of folks have different priorities, and it's important in any process, I think the stakeholder group agreed to have deadlines. And so that's number 3, having comment periods that the commission establishes for the other agencies to weigh in with their concerns regarding an application. Fourth, allowing pre-construction compliance filings to begin before the final PUC order that actually grants the permit. After the commission grants a permit, you have a lot of other filings, compliance filings that have to be made with various agencies, and that can take time. And right now, developers generally wait until after the commission's final written order granting the permit is issued. And that order can take 30 days, maybe more, before it's issued after the commission meeting where the commission actually decides to grant the permit. So there are time savings there. So those are 4 things the commission can do that can trim, 1, 2, maybe 3 months off of the process, depending on the particular project involved. So you start there. And then when you get beyond those first 4, you move into things that the legislature would have. One of them will be moving the EERA staff and their responsibilities from the Department of Commerce to the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. The EERA staff is essentially the staff on the ground that does the environmental review. They're meetings, working with developers and communities and so forth. And it's a bit of an anomaly because the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission is the RGU. Essentially, it's the agency responsible for environmental
Mr.
review.
Lipschultz, we're having a hard time hearing you. Can you maybe try and speak a little closer to your microphone?
Yeah, I'll try that. Can you hear me now? Better?
A little bit better. If you can just speak up for us, please.
All right, I'm going to try to turn this up a little bit, see if that's any better. All right, I'll speak loud and get
Thank
close, which I can do. So the EERA staff is housed right now at the Department of Commerce. And it's a bit out of place there, the stakeholder group concluded, because the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission is the RGU, essentially the agency responsible for environmental review in the permitting process. All other agencies that are RGUs, they have their own staff that essentially does the analytical work for the agency heads that are responsible for the environmental review. And so this idea came up and was discussed robustly by the group, and the general conclusion was that it would make sense to take that EERA staff and move it to the commission where it better aligns with the function of that staff. That staff is essentially the analytical arm of the environmental review agency, which in this case is the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. Now, importantly, it also can significantly reduce the time it takes for the permitting process to proceed. There are delays that come along with having that staff in an agency other than the agency responsible for the decision, because it formalizes the contact and discussions between that staff and the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. They're essentially a party, and they're subject to the requirements that go along with being a party in a proceeding rather than a staff accountable directly to the commission. If you were to move EERA to the commission, you would eliminate a number of largely duplicative steps that go along with having staff housed in a separate agency from the agency it's actually supposed to support and help. Could be 30 to 60 days was essentially the conclusion from the discussions we had in the stakeholder group. Yeah, that's one thing. And I think if you move on, hopefully you can still hear me.
We can, thank you.
Okay, good. That's I think that was number 5. Number 6, allowing the applicant to prepare the environmental analysis and then file that analysis with the permit application. Right now, that's the way it's done for wind facilities, but it could easily be done that way for solar facilities and possibly for transmission, or at least some transmission projects as well. It takes time when you have a separate agency, in this case the commission or the EERA staff, do the environmental review. It adds additional bureaucratic steps to the process. The idea here, and it's worked well for wind projects, is to have the applicant lay out with guidance in statute on what needs to be in there, an environmental analysis of the environmental impact that the project is likely to have. Now, that doesn't mean that the developer or the applicant has the final say in what the environmental impact is. It simply means it's their initial burden to put it out there. And then you will have an opportunity for communities, for other agencies, including DNR, PCA, the Department of Commerce, and ultimately the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission to review that document that is in the applicant's application. And if there are voids in it, fill those voids. If there are problems with it, identify those problems and require the developer to fix them. That would likely be far more efficient than the way the process currently proceeds. And again, it could save a significant amount of time in the permitting process to do that. 7th here, replacing the Citizen Advisory Task Force procedure. There's an option, and it's an option in the statute for the commission to require a Citizens Advisory Task Force if requested. That has happened in a number of cases. It happened when I was on the commission. I was never really sure at the time what value that task force process added. And the general sense from stakeholders was that it doesn't add much value. And to the contrary, it can often cause a lot of confusion. Citizens, community members, and others really often don't know what that task force is all about. Who's on that task force? Why are they on the task force? What authority do they have? You have a commission, you have a department, you have the DNR, you have the Department of Transportation. That is confusing enough. You add the Citizens Advisory Task Force, and you add a lot of additional confusion in some cases with a questionable payoff. The idea would be to replace that with a stakeholder group that would be formed situationally or organically when needed at the call of PUC staff or the applicant. And that would make more sense because it would emerge organically in the course of the process. If there is an issue or if there are certain issues that come up in the process that require some stakeholder discussions, the PUC staff on the ground or the applicant will know it, will see it, and would certainly benefit from and would be inclined to put a stakeholder group together specifically on those issues. And I would probably, at least in the view of the stakeholder group, and I agree, reduce confusion and be far more productive. And again, you save time. It could save a lot of time. Sometimes that task force process can add, a month or two. to the length of a permitting process. So number 8, this doesn't really relate so much to transmission. I know your topic is transmission here, but combining all wind, storage, and solar generation facilities into the alternative review process under 216E04. Right now, we have sort of a hodgepodge. We have a separate statute for wind projects, and then we have another statute for transmission and solar projects. And then within that statute, we have an alternative review process and a full process. A lot more things can go into the alternative review process. That was essentially the sentiment of the stakeholder group. Not everything, some things can't, but certainly solar is already there, and some additional transmission projects could go in there, and that really speaks to the topic of the day here. At least, for example, gen-tie lines. Gen-tie lines are the transmission lines you need to connect a new, let's say, solar or wind facility to the grid. Once you know you need a new wind or solar facility, and we're going to need a lot of new ones to meet the decarbonization requirements of the new law, you need a gen-tie line, because that generation facility is useless unless it's connected to the grid. So it makes sense to sort of expedite that, to use the alternative review process, and perhaps not require a certificate of need process. You can really truncate that process significantly by avoiding processes that really aren't needed in that situation. And there might be other things like rebuilds, relocating transmission. A lot of other things beyond just building brand new transmission are currently subject to the full review process. They're currently subject to both a certificate of need requirement and permitting. And so I think the sentiment here of the stakeholder group was to take a good hard look at additional transmission projects that really don't require the full-blown process, that could fit better and in the alternative review process without compromising public input or the commission's ability to make an informed decision. And if you continue down, you can see in number 10, limiting the required contested case. There are a number of projects that are required, basically full-blown. If you're not in the alternative review process, you essentially have to go through a contested case, which is really a formal evidentiary process presided over by an administrative law judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings. And it's really based under the current statute on the size of the project. But that really, in the judgment of the stakeholder group, shouldn't drive whether you need this additional formal evidentiary process. You can have very large projects that don't have the sorts of material facts in dispute that require an evidentiary hearing. You can have large projects that are very more amenable to an iterative process, to a collaborative process, and not a formal contested evidentiary process. And so the idea really is to, if you really don't need expert testimony to vet facts that need to be explored in a really formal setting, then you shouldn't really require referral to a contested case. The notion of the stakeholder group, the notion that was really developed was, leave it to the discretion of the commission. There are some cases where the commission will know, yes, I think in this case we need a contested case, we want that formal evidentiary review, but don't require it for every project simply based on the size of the project. You go on to number 11 here, eliminating the certificate of need requirement for all wind and solar projects, but I think you move on to number 12, and this gets to transmission, eliminating the certificate of need requirement for gen-tie lines, for example, and maybe other transmission projects. Again, if you're talking about a gen-tie line, it's a line you need to connect a generation facility to the grid. If you already know you need the generation facility, you shouldn't have to go through another certificate of need process to determine whether you need the gen-tie line to make that generation facility actually operable. And there might be some other transmission projects as well that don't require a full-blown contested case, or certainly in this case a full-blown certificate of need process. There's a truncated, a simpler certificate of need process that could apply to some smaller or less controversial transmission projects. We just didn't have time in the 3 meetings we had to really flesh out the details of how you might parse that. But I think there's a lot of room to sort of add additional transmission projects to a list of projects that should not have to go through at least a full-blown certificate of need process. And I'll kind of stop there because we really focused on the top 12, but I'd be happy to talk about any of the others if anyone has any questions, or certainly be happy to answer any questions about the 12 that I've just run through quickly.
Well, again, thank you, Mr. Lipschultz, and I'm referring on the math that you had in the report. I think you estimated that implementing these would save about 9 months of time on the planning process, or the permitting and transmission, the process. And so that if 5+ years is the estimate, that's close to 20% reduction, which I think is certainly a step in the right direction for sure. So again, thank you for all of that work and for these. I don't know, members, anybody have any questions on specifics? Looks like Senator Friends has a question. Oh, go ahead, Senator Friends.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, Mr. Lipschultz, your work here as a convener of the stakeholders is outstanding. And you have done a great service, and so have the stakeholders. So thank you for that. I would never be one to draw comparisons because that's not my style, but we had the Uber Lyft work group where they couldn't even reach a conclusion, much less present it. So I mean very sincerely what you've done here serves the need, and it's a miracle that you did all this in 9 hours of meeting time. Also just want to say thank you for identifying the time savings in the individual proposals. That makes it easy for us to contextualize that. I in particular like the idea that we're not undermining the public input. We're simply saying, where can we avoid duplicity and how can we do it faster? I look forward to working all these, and I'm taking you at your word that the first 12 did not come with great controversy, at least amongst the stakeholder group. Is that a fair statement, Dan?
Mr. Lipschultz.
Madam Chair, Chair Friends, that's a fair statement, although I will add, and I need to point out, that moving EERA staff was, the Department of Commerce has some concerns about that. And there was another concern expressed by, I believe it was MCEA, and that concern was about the optics. If you move that staff to the commission, are you creating a concern somehow that that the public is being cut out? And I think that concern is easily addressed by sort of understanding how this really works, understanding that the EERA staff is an analytical arm of the RGU, and that's the commission. And I think it adds actually more clarity. Then there's less confusion. Right now, one of the things that came out of the stakeholder group was a sense that the public's often confused. You have an EERA staff at the Department of Commerce, then you have the commission, and the commission has its own staff. And then you have the DNR and MnDOT, and then you have this task force I talked about. And it can become really confusing. And public confidence is going to be, as you know, Senator Friends, critical to this. Nothing hurts public confidence more than confusion. Clarity is our friend if we want these processes to work well and if we want the public's confidence throughout these the implementation of these processes. So that, I don't think the optics concern is one that anyone else shared, and I think that it's easily answered. And the Department of Commerce has obvious concerns. You know, the staff is with them right now, and so that they raised that concern. But other than that, I would say that all of those first 12, it's fair to represent that they were widely supported by the stakeholder group.
Senator
Thank
Friends,
you.
did you have a follow-up?
Yep. Just real quickly, Madam Chair, we were talking about the cost of the congestion, Grid North and MISO, and sort of speculate. I did do some back channel checking while we were listening to Mr. Lipschultz. I believe the PUC numbers would suggest that 1.6 billion was lost in 2022 to congestion, and that although 2023 numbers are not yet known as a year, the December 2023 numbers are known, and congestion cost the ratepayers in Minnesota about $34 million. I'm positive we think that amount of money is significant, and these projects that we reviewed today, members, would eliminate that congestion cost, so they pay for themselves very quickly if you follow that math. Thanks again, Mr. Lipschultz. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, members.
Next on the list is Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Lipschultz, it's good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Two questions for, I think the records for the minutes should show that the testifier should be referred to as Dan the Man. I think that's its formal title. No, I'm just kidding.
Second.
So, two quick things, Dan. One, in this, if you don't know the answer to this is fine, but we've had a couple of other testifiers talk to about load growth, and I don't know what jurisdictions they're referring to within MISO in terms of electric demand for it's anticipated, but my understanding is that load growth has been relatively flat. Do you just off the top of your head know what region, like if that's correct, or what the situation is with load demand in the MISO or upper Midwest MISO?
Mr. Lipschultz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Garofalo. I don't have anything similar to Dan the man for you, but I think MISO is probably in a better position to answer that question. I would guess it's probably the southern part of MISO and not MISO North, where load growth is an issue, because I think load has been relatively flat. But on the other hand, looking forward, if we have a lot of electrification of the transportation sector, we could see load growth from that, and there might be other electrification of other sectors that could drive load growth that we wouldn't otherwise expect. But I would, so I'm guessing it's the southern region or the southern part of MISO, but MISO would know that.
Okay.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if at some point in today's meeting, if we could hear from someone about what they were, because we've had multiple people refer to load growth, and if that's anticipated growth or something that's been going on, I just want to make sure that my understanding is in alignment with things. And then Mr. Lipschultz, on the list of items that were supplied, and I don't know, I'm going off the list that was emailed out, so I don't know if there was an updated one that came up, but on number 22 on the list was eliminating the requirement to submit alternate routes, and I thought we had taken care of that. I thought because that is a foolish and wasteful regulation where we are making them go through all these notifications. We unnecessarily get landowners worried on these alternate routes that don't exist. I thought didn't we fix that?
Mr. Lipschultz.
Madam Chair, Representative Garofalo, not entirely. There are some projects that still require submittal of alternative routes, and I can't off the top of my head now tell you exactly which projects they are or where that threshold is, but you did sort of improve that situation, but there are still situations, certain projects that require filing of alternative route or consideration of alternative routes.
Thank you, Mr. Lipschultz. And Representative Garofalo, quick before we move on, Director DeBleeker from MISO is going to refer to your other question.
Well, then I'll defer to Tricia. That's fine.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Regarding the question on load growth and what we're seeing at MISO, I think there's two areas of load growth. And so all of our sources of both our utilities, but then also external sources, MISO's monitoring what load growth is coming. And there are, when I say two categories, I think there's the essential gradual incline in load growth that we saw a decrease in since, not a decrease, but a flattening of since about 2008. And that's most what our utilities were seeing in their general load growth. That we believe is also potentially going to be increasing. That combined with the spot load growth. And it's not, the spot loads aren't just in the south, they are across the entire MISO region. We're hearing more and more, whether it's crypto, data centers, or the different loads that are coming online. I think it's a matter of how many of those spot loads are coming. We think that there might be some load shopping. So we're really just trying to get information from our members and our utilities, and it's something that MISO is looking at very closely, is what is that expected load growth is going to be. But we do see that all trends showing up.
Thank you. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. And I'll take my other questions offline in the interest of time. So thank you to the testifiers today.
Thank you, Representative Garofalo. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I want to thank everybody for the presentations and for the good questions. And is there anyone from the public who would wish to testify before we finish? Going once? Going twice? Nope. Seeing none, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.